What is the value of a child's life? Millions of people die every year in the third world where it could easily be avoided. Hi, my name is Dan Glushefski with the Matthew 2535 Foundation. Originally, the vision was to build an orphanage in a third world country, but God exceeded all my hopes and dreams. Hi, my name is Dan. I wanted to introduce you to two of the children that live at the Children's Lighthouse Orphanage in Choluteca, Honduras. This is Cindy, and she came here a little less than a year ago, and her parents were selling her and they were physically abusing her. And this is Christilla, and she lives here at the orphanage with three of her siblings, and they were all thrown in a pig pen, and that's where they lived and stayed. And we've been able to spend some time with them and see how well they've grown and how well they now can function with other children and play properly and come to church and learn about Jesus. And they're very blessed to be here, and they're two of our little friends. Can you say hola? Can you say hello? Hello?
Hello. Hello.
Hello. All right, thank you for supporting these children in the Children's Lighthouse Orphanage. The Lord had imposed upon me the vision to build an orphanage in a third world country. Where, when, how, I didn't exactly know yet. Those are minor details to me. The important thing was that He asked me to do it. One day I come home with all these books from Central America and throw them on the table, and I tell my wife, I think I'm going to Central America. Doing something crazy wasn't anything out of the ordinary for her. She wasn't surprised a bit. So I asked my pastor if he wanted to go on a survey trip with me to Central America. He actually knew a missionary in Honduras named Henry Parra. I called Henry and told him my vision that I wanted to build an orphanage in a very poor part of town. But he was working in a capital in a wealthy area. But he told me as I was ready to hang up the phone that he knew a missionary named Barry Richey down in Choluteca, Honduras, in a very poor part of the country. So I'm standing here in front of Barry's first home when I came here to Choluteca in 2012. And I have with me Karen and Eric. They both lived here. What do you remember, Karen, growing up living here?
I remember that we used to play here, over there. They used to have
a little playground, I remember.
Yeah. And we used to ride our bicycles here. And we used to watch TV with my dad in his bedroom.
Wow, now you used to have church service right here in the garage, right?
Yeah, and
I got pictures of you guys hanging from the monkey bars when you were little.
Yeah, we...
What do you remember, Eric?
I remember bicycles.
Riding your bicycles, yeah. And then we used to put up the big tent church over here? Or?
Yes, over.
Right over there. This is the first church missionary Barry Richey started back in 2010. It was a tent for years. They met in a tent, put it up, and took it down every day, and they built this church probably around 2014 right in his backyard of his house. So I want to introduce you to Minor. He is the pastor here of the church that Brother Richey started about 2 years ago.
Yes, my name is Minor. I am here 2 years ago, and I am the pastor of this church for the grace of God. And I met Brother Richey when I was 15 in the Bible Institute.
We are standing in the latest project of Honduras Missions, and the Matthew 25 Foundation has been instrumental in helping us in various projects in the past, including this one. This will be a Christian school, and our plan is to bring some of the children in the poor churches that we have up in the mountains down into the city and be able to put them through a private Christian school.
So I called Barry on the phone and introduced myself, and no small talk, just cut to the chase. I say, I want to build an orphanage in a third world country, and I just hear this roaring laugh over the phone.
And the reason for that was it was a direct answer to prayer within that very week.
He informs me he's got 8 orphans living in his house, and he gives me his website, and it's obvious he has a heart's desire to build an orphanage. And then I look at his scripture verse, and it's Matthew 25:35.
We actually put on the corner of one of the property, when saw we, which is that very verse, when saw we thee hungered, when saw we thee fatherless.
Even after our conversation, I didn't assume that Barry would be the guy I would be working with. I continued to pray and search, and about 6 weeks later I called Barry just to talk what he might think it would cost to build the orphanage. He thought about $25,000. It ended up being quite a bit more, but neither one of us knew what we were doing. We just were trying to follow God's call to do something for him.
My name is Jenny. I was 9 years old when I came to the Richey family. I'm so grateful to be part of this family, and I love them very much. I've been here for 14 years, and I'm married. I have 2 kids, and now I'm serving in the ministry.
I grew up in an alcoholic home with fighting every single night, a very fearful child with what seemed to be no future at all. By the age of 12 years old, I was hanging out on the streets, drinking, gambling, and experimenting with drugs. At 16, my life escalated to drinking almost every single night. The one thing that I was lacking most in my life was a relationship with my father. He had no interest in anything I did, never came to a single game, no involvement in my life whatsoever. I remember as a boy fighting with my father in the living room, and I told him, I'm never gonna be like you. But you know what? I grew up just like him.
My name is Gary Tack. I was a Kenmore's track coach for many years, and during the 70s I had the opportunity to coach Dan Glushefski. And Daniel was just sort of the kind of guy that, you think back many times of what he was like, but he was always very punctual. He was a little erratic maybe, but every day he came to practice, he worked hard. He was very personable, very respectful, and it's just one of those things. We had a great team, and he certainly was a big part of it.
From 17 to 28 years old, I drank every single night, most nights completely out of control, until one night when God completely changed my life. While owning a bar in Williamsville, New York, God delivered me overnight of a gambling and alcohol addiction of 11 years. I sold my bar and walked away forever. But I had a new problem. I'm 28 years old with no job training, barely passed high school, 1 semester of college, and only $2,000 to my name. With that $2,000, my best friend Pat and I bought our very first property in Buffalo, New York for $19,000. Over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, we bought a number of houses using FHA assumable mortgages and even buying homes with credit cards, so we had accumulated about 18 properties. In 1990, 2 enormous things happened in my life. I married my wife Maria in September, and just 2 months later we walked into a Christian church, and for the very first time I heard the gospel of Jesus Christ. All my life I had attended religious services, but that day I heard that while I was yet a sinner, Christ died for me. I knew about Jesus Christ, but I had no relationship with him, and when I accepted him that day, he completely changed my life. This is Ruth here. When I was here in 2015, she was just a little baby, and this is a picture we used when we did a banquet to raise funds for the ministry here. And now she is 6 years old, and she's living up here in the mountains with Pastor Augusto.
Mi mamá murió. Ella se llamaba Onella. El esposo de ella la maltrataba. Ella la llevaron al hospital. Y ella murió.
¿Y después?
Le llamaron a Papi Benny. Papi Benny le llamó a Papi Augusto. Y me trajeron para la montaña.
¿Y aquí?
Me pusieron en la escuela. Y ya voy
¿Estudiando?
Voy a estudiar. Leo la Biblia. Es Papi Dios y Papi Augusto y Papi Benny.
This is for you. Para usted.
Gracias.
De nada. About 5 years later, I owned 35 properties in the city of Buffalo and had over $1 million in debt. My wife and I made a goal to be debt-free in 10 years, but the Lord did it in just 4. In 2001, I went on my very first short-term mission trip to Guyana, South America. While I was there, God broke my heart as I would take walks in the morning through the villages with little shacks and poverty everywhere, children playing in squalor. I said to God, Lord, I want to do something about this. Shortly after I came home, I came across a book called God Owns My Business by Stanley Tam. Along with the mission trip, it inspired me to make a sacrifice and do something great for God. That was the beginning of the Matthew 25-35 Foundation. The plan was to continue to buy real estate and donate 1 out of every 10 houses to the foundation and use that money to fuel God's work. Sounds easy, but when you're a small company and you're making just enough money to keep the company afloat and feed your family, it's not that easy to donate $25,000. Despite all my failures and my shortcomings, God was blessing my business, and I was debt-free now, and I was finally in a position to really start giving. It was 1 month before my trip, and I still had no potential to raise $25,000 easily. One day I get a call from an investor who wants to dump a problematic property that's over on the west side of Buffalo. My business is buying other people's problems. I buy properties for cash below market, fix them up, and resell them for a profit. So when I saw the property, it was just so bad I told him I was going to pass on it. It was vacant and it had a lot of potential housing violations. Ironically, the guy asked me, do you know anywhere I could donate the property? I told him, I have a 501c foundation, but really I'd be a little nervous to take on this property and hold it in the name of the Matthew 25-35 Foundation. I just couldn't take the risk of the city of Buffalo breathing down my neck with some property that I had no way of unloading now. But inside, I can't stop thinking, Honduras, Orphanage. So I tell the guy, hey look, just don't do anything yet. In my business, I'm getting calls regularly for people that want to sell property and people that want to buy property. A couple days later, I get a phone call from a guy from Australia that wants to come in and look at some property in Buffalo. So I think maybe I can middle the deal. Middling the deal is like taking an assignment. I tell the guy, I'll buy it from you if I can sell it to someone else. It never really goes into my name, but for a few seconds. So I call back the seller and I say, look, I think I got a buyer. You'll be able to donate the property. We'll be able to use the funds for missions over in Honduras. The investor comes in next week, takes a look at the property, and offers me $25,000 cash, which is exactly the amount that Barry told me I need to be able to build the orphanage.
Hi, my name is Antonio. I come to the orphanage when I have 9 years old, and the best part of my life is meet God and meet Pat Barry, and I want to be a missionary, and it's a blessing for me to work for God and the ministry.
3 days later, Barry calls me and tells me someone donated the money for the land. My head's spinning. I don't even tell him that I have the money from the sale of the house to build the orphanage. I'm just amazed that God is orchestrating all this. It was just amazing. Just a couple days later, I close on my transaction, put the money in the foundation account, and prepare to go on my trip with Pastor Folk. On November 14, 2007, Pastor Folk and I traveled to Honduras on our survey trip to build an orphanage. When we arrived at Barry's home, it was very humbling. It was a very poor neighborhood, a small 2-bedroom house with a small kitchen. He converted this little living room space into sleeping quarters for the 8 orphans. They had bars on their gate and even bars on the ceiling of the house because people were trying to break in.
I was in Honduras maybe 10 or 12 years ago, and I've been on several missions trips, maybe 20 trips around the world. And that particular trip made a great impact on my heart and my soul. I've seen a man of God doing the work in a most difficult environment. We had a very humble dinner when I was there, but it was wonderful to see Mrs. Barry fixing that for us, and we enjoyed it. I just remember laying there my first night, just amazed how people live that love the Lord so much.
Dinner that night is a meager bowl of soup. This guy's feeding 11 people on a shoestring budget. I love the guy's heart. I ask him, how are you surviving on such a small amount of donations every month? And he says to me, if you're in a life raft and it's full and overflowing with survivors and you find another one drowning, what do? I said, I don't know. And he says, you pull another one in the raft.
Hi, my name is Karen, and the best thing that ever happened to me is that when I met my dad, I was a little girl, and when I met him and his family, the Richey family, and I am so thankful to God and for my dad, and for Dan, of course, for supporting us.
Our very first day out with Barry, he shows us 3 very exciting pieces of property, very different. We really liked the one that was about $85,000. The property was beautiful. It was full of fruit trees, coffee plants. It had this little bridge over this little running creek, and it was on the side of a mountain. I mean, it was really breathtaking. That day, as I walked over the property, I couldn't help just seeing and envisioning children playing and laughing. And I just prayed, Lord, I hope this is your will. In America, we are so spoiled. Everything is just so fast. In Honduras, everything takes 3 to 5 times longer. You could wait 3 hours in line to go to the bank. To drive up a mountain, sometimes 2-3 hours. Our very first day, we went to look at 3 different properties and drove up one mountain, came back down, and then on the other side of town, drove up the other mountain. We were gone from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. These roads are about as primitive as you can get. Jagged rocks, mud, dirt, logs in the road. To go maybe 20 miles can take about an hour, hour and a half. Our second day there, we're pretty tired. And Barry says, hey, I want to show you something up on the mountain. I said, Barry, how long is that going to take us? And he says, oh, about an hour. I said, is that American time or Honduran time? He tells me a couple hours. It's getting late, and I know it's really dangerous driving down the mountain at night between robbery and going off the side of a cliff to death. I know it's not going to take a couple hours, but we decide we head up the mountain. And I love this guy too. I mean, he stops for every need. He gives people rides. Someone will stop him and ask for prayer. We'll get out and pray for 20, 30 minutes. There might be a medical need. There might be a need for food. There might be a need for money, for medicine. And he makes every single stop up that mountain. By now it's 8 p.m. and Pastor Folk and I are exhausted, and Barry is still going strong. Pastor Folk and I are sitting in the back of the truck. It's late. It's pitch black. It's so dark I can't see him 2 feet away from me. And I whisper to him, this guy's a machine. He just never stops.
Oh, a great memory from that trip was we were riding up a dried up riverbed to get to some unreached people, really. It was the roughest pickup truck ride I've ever been in. And Dan and I were shaking all over the place, you know, being beat up in this truck. And Dan leans over and says something to me. And then I said to him, you know, Danny, they're gonna pitch Barry inside, try to keep him from doing too much damage.
Pastor Folk does a perfect, flawless imitation of Hall of Famer Joe Morgan, talking about how you got to pitch Barry Bonds inside, because if you put it across the plate, he's going to hit a home run. And that's how Barry is. Every day of his life, he's out there serving the Lord, hitting a home run, when we can't even keep up with him for just a couple days. It was right there, right then, in the pitch black, in the dark, driving down the mountain, that I told Barry that I was going to commit to fund the building of the Children's Lighthouse Orphanage. Growing up on the streets as a kid, I've always just pushed things to the very limit. Pastor Folk and I drove back to the airport the next day, and we got back 20 minutes before our flight was about to leave, and we had 3 pesos left in our pocket. To our surprise and absolute amazement, we needed to pay a $35 deportation tax to get out of the country, and we needed to get out of Honduras. We frantically, Pastor Folk goes up to call Charlie Barkowski, our church administrator, trying to see if we can get money wired immediately. I'm in line trying to get the tickets, and we're in an absolute panic. People tell me all the time that God doesn't do miracles. Out of nowhere, this young Honduran man, who happens to be a U.S. citizen because he's in the U.S. Army, overhears my panic and me and Pastor Folk talking, and he offers us $70 to get out of the country. We're talking a young man, 21 years old, and just going to give us $70. We plead with him to be able to pay him back, and he refuses. He was so just taken that we were Americans were in his country trying to help the poor, that he wanted to give us the money, and we accepted the gift. It was just beautiful. The Lord was providing, and before I even sent Barry any money, he was already starting to clear the land. Barry did an amazing job overseeing the construction. When I fund a project, it is God's money, and I'm just giving God's money to God's man. It's his job, he's in control, and he runs the whole show. Like so many other projects overseas in the third world, they made their own bricks. They were able to pull a lot of product from the riverbed. They make their own concrete. They'll pull stone, they'll pull sand, and they make their concrete. There's no cement mixers. They mix concrete right on the ground and just shovel it in. The very first big obstacle we came across was we needed to build a retention wall. The orphanage was built on the side of a mountain, and they had to dig it out. A project like this in the United States probably would have cost $300,000 just for the wall. But with Honduran labor being very inexpensive and basically getting our own product right from the earth, we saved hundreds of thousands of dollars building that wall. There's so many obstacles in the third world that we never encounter. Just about every country has two seasons. You got the rainy season and the dry season. When it rains, it tends to wash out buildings there. And our second big problem, we had a full 20-foot wall built on the one side of the orphanage. The weather just took it completely down. Actual construction started in February, and in April, my other pastor, Pastor Camilleri, decided to have us go down, and we took a team of 32 men, women, girls, and boys to work alongside the Hondurans building the children's lighthouse. I gotta tell you, I'm so impressed with God's people. Can you imagine making maybe $30,000, $35,000 a year, and you take your vacation with your money and spend $1,000 to go down to a third world country and do construction in 100 degrees? I mean, I just am so grateful and so thankful for our church people and so many Christians around the world who give so much, so generously for God's work.
One of my fondest memories of the trip is that first day when we started on the scene, and I think there was a miscommunication maybe to the missionary that we were all coming in as expert builders, but that was far from the case. One of our men was a public school teacher. One of our men was a graphics arts designer. I think we had a film, someone that manufactured Kodak film. And so we were trying our best. We were not masters of really anything. And the end of that first day, I remember it was 105 degrees. We were really struggling with the concrete and the mortar and things like that. And the missionaries thought we were maybe slacking a little bit. And he sort of said, well, are we putting our all in? And so I just went around the room and I said, Bill, what do you do for a living? And that's one of our guys. And he said, I'm a school teacher. And I said, Bob, what do you do for a living? He said, I'm a graphic arts engineer. And he went around the room and realized that no, we were not at all expert construction workers. However, were able to put that thing together and got a tremendous amount of work accomplished in a short period of time in really rough conditions that we were not used to.
That first trip with the 32 people was possibly my favorite mission trip out of the 30-some trips I've taken. There is nothing more rewarding than working so hard, sweating, eating, living with people just working for God. It was just such, I don't know how to express it. If you've never been on a mission trip, you gotta do it. You really gotta do it for your own sake. In Honduras, when you're buying product, and I'm just being honest with you, one day the rebar's $10 a pound. They see Americans coming. The next day, it could be $30 a pound. It is just a reality in third world to try to get whatever you can. They're so poor. When they see the Americans there, the prices just go up. And our construction costs went up because of that, but it wasn't going to deter us in one single bit. What a beautiful week. We're working all day long, and unlike any other construction site, there's 10 little children running around, hanging out with us, playing, working alongside. I'm seeing Tonio, he's like 9 years old, carrying 50-pound metal girders that we need to use for the building, and it was amazing. And at the end of the trip was one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen, and that was saying goodbye. I watched my daughter, who was 12, and my son, who was 10, hugging the necks of the children from the orphanage, Antonio and Jenny, just crying, and I'm crying watching it. It was just, we bonded then, right there, with the children from the orphanage, with Barry. Together, we became a family that day.
Yeah, I remember saying goodbye was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I was, I think, 12 years old at the time, and we were staying in this hotel, and there's, you know, the gate in the front, and it's kind of shaped like a horseshoe or a U in the courtyard in the middle. And you know, I remember the missionary came with all the orphans in the truck, and everybody saying goodbye. And I don't really like saying goodbye even to this day. A lot of times I'll just kind of sneak off or say goodbye quickly and get out of there. And I remember kind of doing that and saying goodbye to some of the kids and to some of the boys, and to Tonio and Ricardo and some of the boys that I gotten close with. And then I just remember going into my hotel room and sitting on the edge of the bed and sobbing uncontrollably. And I didn't really know why. And I'm not necessarily the most emotional person. It's kind of hard to get tears out of me. And I was just sitting on the bed, just shaking and sobbing and just so emotional. And you just really get connected to these kids, and you feel bad for them, but then at the same time, they seem so happy and they seem like they have such a good life. And it's just easy to fall in love with them and become such good friends with them.
The one thing I did learn is that if you just bring a little bit of candy and a smile, these kids are going to come flocking to you. And they did. They were just coming out of the woodwork, all these kids, just because they wanted to see someone that loved them. And that's what we have to offer. We have an opportunity to love these kids the way that God loves us. And our love for them is a reflection of what God's love is for us.
The reason I went to Honduras was to give back some of my skills that God has given to me to work on the orphanage and do some plumbing work and some construction there. And that was the main reason I went. But after being there for a very short amount of time, just meeting the kids and just the great work that Brother Richey's doing there, just the spirit of the children, the happiness, the scripture and the different things they're learning about the Lord and the way they hold themselves, and just it was heart touching to be able to have children come up and hang on you and smile and have a sincerity of love and compassion for people coming to see them and be a part of their lives. And just the one highlight for me was just having a little 8-9-year-old girl come up one day, and just I was sitting alone and just thinking a little bit there, and she just come up and sat down next to me and looked up at me, and it was just touching, because she held my hand in my arm and just smiled at me and just stayed there for a while, you know, and it was just heart melting. And it was a blessing being there. And if I had the opportunity to go back again, definitely would go back again.
Well, that trip, we seemed to start a tradition of the ride to the airport and having some kind of mayhem happen. Because we had 32 people, we divided in groups to get back to the airport. And I traveled with my son and Tom Smith and a couple other guys, John Giordano. And the trip to the airport is probably about 3 hours. It's only about 100 miles. but it's winding mountainous road. We're going from the valley up 7,000 feet and then back down about 3,000 feet to the airport. Well, Barry had arranged for a taxi, which was like an older van, those styles with the engines that sits between the two seats. And halfway there, we stop to take a little break. And I get out of the van and I drop my camera on the ground. And when I bent down, I look and the van's on fire. There's flames. I yell to especially my son, get out of the van, the thing's on fire. And they're getting out of the van, and meanwhile we're throwing our luggage as far from the van as we possibly could as this thing just erupted in flames. So while the taxi driver's trying to put out the fire and we're trying to get to safety so the thing doesn't explode on us, we're in a panic. We got about an hour and a half to get to the airport, and we're in the middle of nowhere with no time really to spare at all. We're dividing and we're looking, what can we do? It seemed at the time miraculous, but a bus, not a tour bus, but a bus that goes from Choluteca to the airport comes down the road with a guy hanging out the door holding a fire extinguisher. There's a man coming down the mountain with a bucket of water trying to put out the fire. While they're doing that, I yell into the bus trying to communicate with a bus driver that only speaks Spanish that we need a ride to the airport. Desperately, we need a ride to the airport. About 3 minutes into my conversation, John yells from about 100 yards away, come on, I got us a ride. I can't believe this is happening. So we run over, there's a truck there. And again, people say all the time, I gotta say it, God doesn't do miracles. This Honduran man decides to stop the truck and give 6 Americans a ride. We're in his truck. We had to load all our luggage, plus 6 of us, 3 in the cab, 3 riding in the back of the truck with the luggage to get this ride to the airport. Within minutes, the driver who's speaking to us in broken English starts telling us when he was a little boy, a Christian missionary stopped by his village and gave him some guitar strings. Now, mind you, he's not a Christian man, but he wanted to repay God by helping us get to the airport, go out of his way for us because of what happened in his village when he was a little boy with this Christian missionary. I got to tell you, that's the way God does things. God uses people to help or bless other people. That's the way miracles happen. And that was a miracle. We got back to the airport maybe 15 minutes before our flight and was able to get back home to Buffalo, New York. I'm sitting here with my 2 amigos. I've known Lennon and Eric for 12 years. Lennon's 20 now and Eric is 16. And about 4 or 5 years ago, we did a banquet in Buffalo, and these were cards for sponsor cards. So the guys have these pictures when they're young. They think they're sort of funny looking, don't they? So these are 2 of my good friends, and we've had a relationship for 12 years now, and we're excited what God's doing in their life. Over the course of the next year, I took 2 more mission teams back to the Children's Lighthouse. While there, we had one of the most exciting, I would liken it, I'm a big football fan, to playing in the Super Bowl. Exciting, stimulating experience of my entire life. Many years ago, I saw a very gritty, hard film about an American that was in Turkey and was imprisoned in a Turkish prison. And I could understand and empathize with this guy with our experience. We were asked to go and preach the gospel in the prison in Honduras. And after going in and speaking, it was just a relief to get out of there. But as we were leaving, the man said, the guys on the other side want you to come in. And I said, what do you mean the guys on the other side? He said, well, on the other side are all the gang members and the murderers. And I look at Carlos, who was our guide and interpreter, and I said, is that safe? And he says in his broken English, I don't know. No one's ever gone in before. And I said, whoa. I was scared. I was real scared. You got to understand, when we pulled up to the prison, there's probably 20 guards with AK-47s. But I thought, that's sort of strange, they're all outside. Well, I find out that there's no guards inside the prison. It's about 2-story high wall with no roof, open. If they got a problem, they just get up on the wall and point those guns. They don't go in. So when they got us in there, they strip searched us, checked us out here, patted us down, took our passports, and just like that movie, there's this old dilapidated steel gate, and it opens up, and then boom, closes, and we're in. We're in by ourselves. There's 7 of us and the inmates. The very first guy that meets us has a tattoo across his forehead, tattoos on his neck, no shirt on, muscular, and he don't speak any English. We got Carlos, our interpreter, and he just leads us, and we're looking at each other just petrified. Steve Ackley was the perfect guy for me to bring to preach that day. He's 6'3", bald, come off the streets of Philadelphia, gritty guy, and he's just a passionate preacher. And we get taken to this sort of room with like a U-shaped, and we got our backs up against the wall, and the inmates are all sort of surrounding us, and they're coming and going. They come if they want. We had to get permission from the head gang member to come in and preach, and he's there. And so some guys are coming, some guys are, just sort of milling about. And at first they're doing it like you did in high school, acting cool and like they don't care. And then as Steve starts preaching, they get engaged. And Steve is preaching and he's intense, and I'm watching these guys, and some of the guys, their faces are getting hard. I see one guy clenching his fists, and Steve's preaching like crazy, and it's just amazing. And one guy looks like he might be shedding a couple tears, but I look over about halfway through to the head gang member, and he's looking as cool as he could look, and he just looks at me and he gives me this like an approval, like I like this, what I'm hearing. When we got done preaching, these guys that were so hardened, they're killers, they're gang members, they're hugging our necks. A couple guys were just thanking us. And we found out later that no one has ever gone in to see them. When they heard we were preaching on the other side, they wanted to know, is your gospel, is your God real? Because if it is, do you got the guts to come in and talk to us? We were the only men that have ever gone in to see them, and they were so thankful. It was like winning the Super Bowl. I know it sounds crazy, you might be laughing right now, but it was unbelievable.
Another highlight for me being in Honduras was being able to go to a jail, prison, and preach the gospel, and it was quite unique how they let you in this prison, but you had to be okayed by a gang member or gang leader. And once they let you in and locked you in, and nobody came in with you. And that was quite unique. But we were able to get in there, and at first people were very stand-backish and very, I wasn't sure what to expect, but I preached a simple message out of the book of Mark, and I could tell that the Lord was working, the hearts were touched. Some of the neat things, something that really spoke to my heart, really grabbed a hold of me, was being able to look at the one man on the ground, sitting on the ground, and I could see wet spots from his tears in the dusty floor. And that just, it was exciting to me because I knew God was working on some hearts, and that was very, very exciting. And after it was all said and done, the people were very open and came up and hugged us and shook our hands. And God was there. God was in it and worked it all out, and it was just a blessing.
In 2009, I brought a team of 19 more volunteers from our church to finish the work of the building of the Children's Lighthouse. While there, Barry and the children moved into their new home. What a blessing that must have been for these kids who have begged on the streets and rummaged for a meal to have a clean, spacious home with 3 hearty meals a day and a family that really loved them. Amazingly, out of the now 25 children, only one was a true orphan. All the rest of the kids were taken away by the Honduran court for physical abuse, neglect, and being sold on the streets. One baby was found in the back of a pickup truck, and Ruth was delivered premature in the hospital. As news in the home grew, the government child protective agencies kept bringing children. Sadly, many children were forced to go back into the dangerous and unhealthy lifestyles when their parents would show up several years later. Over the next several years, my kids and I visited delivering Christmas gifts in 2013 and 2015. God has done a mighty work in many lives through the willing hands and tireless work of the Richeys and through generous donations from many families in Western New York. That's how God does miracles, using ordinary people like you and me. So I'm standing here in front of Barry's When Saw We property. He bought this property about 15 years ago when he first got here for $1,500. It's surrounded really basically in a slum with garbage everywhere. But just to give you an idea what these guys are up against, when he bought this, he wanted to put a container here. Well, they broke into it. So they put locks in, they broke into it. They built a wall, they broke into it. They put barbed wire on the top, they broke into it. At the end, he had to weld the container shut every time they used it to finally prevent people from being able to break in here.
¿Cuál es la más grande necesidad aquí?
Buscar las cosas de Dios, arrepentirse para que vengan las bendiciones a la casa.
This is the neighborhood where Sider and all his siblings grew up and walked across town over to Barry's house. I've been on, I think, 31, 32 mission trips. I've been back to Haiti twice. I've been to Africa, to Liberia once, and then to Zambia twice, and Mozambique. But I've gone back to Honduras 10 times. The Lord keeps bringing me back there, and you know what it is? It's these children's lives. I mean, to see a child grow from 2 or 3 or 5 or 6, like Ruth at 2 and Eric at 4 when I first met them, and see what God's doing in their lives is so much more rewarding than me buying a house and making $50,000 profit. I could not ever invest, other than maybe my own children's lives, make a better investment than investing in these children's lives. I don't have the wherewithal. I don't have the capabilities. I don't have the endurance. I don't have the patience of these missionaries. I could never do what they do, but I can give. I can give my time, I can give of my finances, and I can't see a better investment than these children. It has been 12 years since I first journeyed to Choluteca, Honduras, and met Barry and met the children and got involved with funding the building of the Children's Lighthouse Orphanage. And I say orphanage, but you know what? It's a home. Barry and his wife are mom and dad to these kids. They call him Poppy Barry. It's thrilling, it's rewarding, it's exciting to see what God is doing. Tonio is now 21 and he is attending college, and his goal in life is to be a missionary. And Jenny is already serving sort of like a missionary alongside Poppy Barry in everything that he does. And Lenine has become a tremendous mechanic, and he took apart the truck and took the chassis off, and he's rebuilding the Kia truck. And Sider, he's a young man, he's got ambition. I talked to him, does he have a lady in mind? He says, I want to have my life in order, I want to serve God, and then I will look to be married. These kids impress me. They're just so, God has done such a work in them. And Karen and Eric, they're growing. And it's just so amazing to see the fruit that has come from the hard work of Barry and his wife in this ministry and what Lord has done. And I just want you to know, I feel I've played such a very small part. They're there every day serving. I'm back in America living my life and really a life of comfort and so many blessings. But I give God all the glory of what is done and how He touches lives, how He changes lives, and how He uses ordinary people like me and you. I just want to thank you for taking the time to watch this film, and I want to tell you God loves you and God bless you, and thank you again.